first met Mike when I started work for Lambeth Council in '87, and he was already a shop steward in the libraries then. And when the convener for his department was elected as branch secretary, he stepped up as convener. And in that role, he organised the picket lines across libraries, adventure playgrounds, leisure centres in the '89 pay dispute, which was a very successful dispute. He was a very active convener and he took on other roles in the branch, but most of all, he was a dedicated and committed shop steward. I worked with him several times on individual casework, trying to get the best for trade unionists who'd suffered injustice from management. And Mike had a dogged determination to defend his members and a passionate belief in trade unionism as a vehicle to achieve justice for working people. And as well as protecting and defending individual workers, Mike also played a key role over many years in sustaining union organisation in Lambeth libraries. And now, almost a quarter of a century after Mike left Lambeth, the libraries are still the best organised and most militant section of the council workforce. So when he was a trade union activist, when I knew him in Lambeth in the 80s and the 90s, Mike didn't seek out limelight or glory, but he was the model of a hard-working grassroots union representative, one of the thousands who kept our movement going through the hard years of those Tory governments. And I was really pleased when I met Mike at an LRC event years later to discover that he was becoming a councillor in Hastings, because I'm quite sure that the qualities that made him an excellent shop steward will have served him well as a socialist local councillor. And I know other people here will generally know of Mike through his more recent work, but the Mike Howard I'm going to remember is a considerably younger man working with me very diligently to save the job of a union member who'd been unfairly dismissed. And we won that case together. And that member was just one of very many Lambeth workers whose lives were touched and made better by the work that Mike did as a shop steward. He's salt of the earth doesn't begin to do it. Mike was part of the heart and soul of the labour movement. And I just want to say to Mike, farewell, brother. It was an honour to serve alongside you in the struggle.
Well, I obviously I do know mostly through politics, but also became a friend. I moved down to Hastings about just over 6 years ago and met Mike quite early on through the Labour Party. And I happen to have been with the family quite a lot this week, either directly or on the phone. And I was with Mike when he got the terrible news that his death was very imminent. I'm very, very grateful and honoured to have been able to, be with him while he was processing, some of that information, the first point. But what I really wanted to do was read some other people's tributes, if that's okay, because somehow I ended up collating tributes and they're still coming in. Dee, his wife, is having some difficulty getting on, but she's happy that the program's being recorded. And I'm going to go and see her after the show and take her what I've got so far, which is actually 7 solid pages, and more have come in since I printed this off. And I think there's a couple that are very telling, I feel. So one is from a fellow member of Unite Community locally. I only got to know Mike after the past year, but it's strange. It feels like I knew him a lot longer. He was such a friendly and welcoming comrade. For socialists of a certain age, we've been through so many struggles together, it seems to have created an unspoken bond, a shared tradition. I have absolutely no doubt which side Mike was on in the great campaigns against racism during the miners' strike, the poll tax campaign, and the anti-war movement. Over the past few months, I kept bumping into him at protests over Palestine, NHS pay, refugee rights, and the police bill. And I won't forget his outrage and eloquence in challenging the witch hunt of socialists and anti-Zionists in the Labour Party. The movement has lost a principled socialist and internationalist anti-racist, and above all, an anti-Zionist Jew. His hope for socialist future will live on in the growing movements of young people. I will just read one more. I could read loads, but this is another local comrade, Sarah, who said, such sad news for the local Labour Party, such a lovely man, so rooted in the human dignity and decency of socialism, and so unfairly targeted and isolated by the party he cherished his whole life. and then kept away in sickness from his true soulmate, his wife, obviously, who he met as a teen at a young socialist group. I wish more people were like Mike Howard. And there are many, from younger people or people who moved to Hastings or who joined or rejoined the party when Corbyn was elected, to say he was the person who made sure they were welcomed, that they knew where the pub was that people were going to after meetings. And again, several people have said, I learned so much from him, particularly about Labour history. So obviously this is a political group and we focus on his political thing. I can tell you he died furious at the Labour Party. The anger he expressed in that video that you just showed is he was saying on Monday when I last spent time with him. And he was a fighter to the very end, but he was also a very loving partner and carer for his wife, and a very, very good and reliable friend. And he will be very, very badly missed in the local Labour Party, because he was still a very active soul, even if he wasn't allowed to be meetings. He would conveniently have his head around while Dee was attending Zoom meetings, because he was their carer, so he could be waving in the background sometimes. But yeah, it is disgraceful that he and you know, many people here will remember Reva Joff, who died also with, you know, a Jewish lifelong anti-racist, who died with this stain of an accusation, but actually it's not a stain on her, it's a stain on the Labour Party. Yeah. I think there's other people want to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah, for coming on.
Yeah, I think a lot of what I wanted to say has been said, but I first knew Mike when he mentioned that he had to leave school, and we both ended up at Kingsway Further Education, and we set up a Knowles, the Labour Student Labour Club from there. And yeah, we just went round all the students to try and sort of get them to join and raise the ideas of socialism, of the left. And the Labour Party conference had passed quite a lot of good resolutions at that time, and we had a positive we were having a positive result. So I knew Mike for nearly 50 years off and on. I wasn't always in contact with him directly, but that really didn't matter, because when you got back in touch with him over something, it didn't matter that you hadn't spoken to him for years, or Dee for that matter, because I knew Dee also through the LPYS. He just carried on as if it was like yesterday. And it wasn't only just the socialist ideas in terms of politics, it was, you know, the outward politics, it was the inward politics, that he stood for everything an ideal person should stand for. Like when he heard that he had to go into hospital, the contribution he made on Facebook was actually about what was happening to Dee and how she was going to be looked after. And he was just so flamboyant. I think in a recent post to Tony Greenstein, I sort of said that he was always very colourful. Sometimes when you looked at photographs, I wasn't quite sure if it was him or not, because he either had his face painted or he had colourful jumpers on or anything. And I always think of Hastings being a very gay place in terms of it being very vibrant and active in the community, not just on like talking about national politics, but also what was happening to people locally. Himself and Dee are a fantastic couple, and my best wishes go to Dee. I know back in the summer she was saying that to speak to her you needed to go on Facebook, because she couldn't hear, so that she could lip read anything you wanted to talk about. And I just wanted to emphasize that perhaps we should find out if Dee's better taking Facebook messages, like face-to-face, FaceTiming, rather than just trying to make phone calls.
Well, thank you, Helen.
Thanks, Crispin. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Good. I was CLP secretary for Hastings and Rye for 12 years, during the time that Mike was a councillor, and during that 12 years, for most of that time, we were the only Labour council south of the River Thames. And other CLPs used to ring me and say, well, how do you do it? And I often used to say, it's because we've got committed socialists and we're not afraid to be socialists and we're not afraid to use the S word. And Mike personified that locally, I have to say. And the other thing about Mike, which has not been said, which might bring a smile to some people, is Mike was very loud. I remember a group of us were on a train up to London to a protest. I forget what the protest was, but by the time we got to Charing Cross, everybody in the carriage knew exactly what we were doing because Mike was so loud. We will miss him sadly. We really will. I'm going to get emotional now, so that'll be it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Peter.
Yes, can you hear me, Crispin?
I can, yeah.
It's very difficult watching that video of Mike, keeping control of the fury and the grief. I, like Diana, got to know Mike in the last year, was involved in the LA4J group taking the Labour Party to court. I'll be as brief as I can. We had a number of long conversations. It was difficult having short conversations with Mike. He was incredibly dynamic. And I'm one of a group of people that are interviewing a cross-section, quite a large number of the Jewish comrades who've been accused of anti-Semitism, who've fallen foul of the corrupt disciplinary processes. And it's been a privilege listening to a wide range of Jewish voices. Mike's voice within that group is very, very distinctive, as basic as his accent. But beyond that, you can hear a man through his accent, but through his real life experiences, who's absolutely deeply rooted in Jewish working class struggle, going back 3 generations, the noble tradition of the Bundists. And in his interview, which was both him and Dee, it was very touching how mutually supportive they were all the way through. Dee herself is not Jewish, and she had to gently prod him occasionally to remind him of some of the anti-Semitic behavior he'd suffered. But they both, in their interview, but particularly Mike, stressed support for the Palestinians. And that was based on his understanding of internationalism. And that internationalism stemmed from the Bundist tradition, as opposed to the nationalist tradition of the Zionists. It's a huge loss. We will be producing a project, which I won't talk about now, and I hope that Mike's voice will be central to that, based on all these recordings.